All right, thanks for being with us, everybody. Most of you I know. For those I don't, I'm Chris Watson, Director of Communications for the New York State Public High School Athletic Association. Opportunity tonight for a Zoom conference call interview with Dr. Robert Zayas, our Executive Director. Been a busy couple weeks, obviously, around the association. Many of you have gotten the releases and the statements and all the stuff we have put out revolving around fall sports and the return to interscholastic athletics. So we'll kind of cover all those bases tonight. As I mentioned, please utilize the chat feature to submit your question. We'll go around the room as best we can to get as many of them answered as we can. Not really a set time limit on tonight's Zoom, but we'll obviously try to keep it moving for everybody involved, as I know you've got stuff to do tonight. As everybody is used to by now, I'm going to say it like on every Zoom you've been on. If you're not talking or if you're on the phone, please mute yourself. We don't want to have to go through the process of tracking down who the speaker is and mute them. But if you could please mute yourself, we will on our end, and we'll YouTube people done tonight. So if you need to revert back to the again. But at this time, thanks for getting ready. So we'll get started. Robert, before we jump into the first question, I guess the easiest thing to have you do is start with what have you been up to? We haven't spoken to media by a couple weeks. Obviously, it's been a very, very busy time last couple weeks. Everybody got a broad overview of where we're at.
You think I've done this, I have to take myself off mute. So, I was thinking for taking the time call meeting. I know these are the fact that you bring to high schools and the coverage that you provide. It's been a very busy time for the last couple of weeks. As you may recall, on July 3rd, the department had basically prohibited interscholastic sports until additional guidance and authorization was provided. Volleyball did make an announcement that interscholastic sports would allow to begin. Low and moderate risk sports would be allowed to start with both practice and competition on September 21st, and high risk sports, as determined by the New York State Department of Health, would be limited practice only. And those high risks are just volleyball, in some cases, depending upon where it's hosted here in the fall. So that's where we stand right now. Our COVID task force this morning for the 5th time, after a number of meetings with our 11 geographic sections, officers of the association, myself, met following the COVID taking their recommendations and looking to provide guidance for our member schools. Probably the biggest announcement out of this morning's decision of the officers of the State High School Athletic Association is we are going to delay the winter sports season start date by 2 weeks. So the starting will begin on November the 30th. We also modified the practice requirements for fall sport athletes out of an abundance of caution. Right now, prior to COVID, the practice requirements were 6 practices for all sports, and then in 4 high-risk sports, such as football and wrestling, they were 10. The officers decided this morning that all fall sports would be 10, with the exception of football, that would require 12 practices. The officers and I also discussed, what about volleyball and football? Since they're limited to practice only, is there any consideration for moving them to another part of the school year at this point in time? The officers have decided that right now, volleyball and football are going to remain in the fall season. The officers also discussed waiving the 7 consecutive practice rule, which means students cannot convene for practice on 7 consecutive days during the regular season. This is permissible during the postseason. We made a decision as an association this morning to waive the 7 consecutive practice rule starting on Monday, October 12th. And lastly, with the guidance provided by the governor on August 24th, it limited low and moderate risk sports from participating outside of their region or contiguous region or county until October the 19th. We as an association took an additional step to be a little bit more restrictive and limited low and moderate risk sports to not being allowed to participate beyond your league or section until October the 19th. That's really a very quick synopsis of what's transpired over the course of the last couple weeks and the last couple months. And again, certainly appreciate you being on here this evening and more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you, Robert. We'll jump into it. So first question comes from Lindsey Kramer of the Syracuse Post-Standard. He wants to know about the delay of the winter season, the 2-week delay that we announced today. What does that mean for the winter state tournaments and then the start of the spring season?
Well, and that's a great question. That's been a question that I've been asked several times today. All that the association did today was postpone the start of the winter sports season from November the 16th to November 30th. This affords sections the opportunity to have 2 additional weeks of the fall season if they so choose to host fall sports in the next few weeks. But keep in mind that it is a decision of the section and of school districts as to whether they wish to host a sports season this fall.
Second part of Lindsay's question, and you kind of briefly touched on it, but I don't know if you wanted to get into it deeper. Possibility of playing volleyball and football in the fall as they're scheduled and kind of where we stand with those two sports targeted as high risk.
Yeah, right now, based upon the information and the guidance that we've been provided by state officials, volleyball and football have been labeled as high-risk sports by the New York State Department of Health. Therefore, they are limited to practice. If anything changes, that decision and that determination would be made by state officials. We, as the State High School Athletic Association, do not have the authority to supersede any decisions made by state officials.
Okay, next question comes from Spectrum Rochester. He asked, what is the situation for a student athlete who may be behind the eight ball, if you will, on the scholarship situation because other states may be playing and a kid in our area may be delayed and may not get to attract the attention of a college coach?
I think college coaches understand what's taking place right now throughout the country. There's a number of states that have elite level athletes participating at the high school level that are not currently participating in their sport of choice. Most notably, the state of California has postponed all sports in the fall until December, I believe. Every state has their own unique situation and their own unique circumstances. Unfortunately, there are unintended consequences in all aspects of this COVID crisis. And I know that there's parents and students that are concerned with the potential of college scholarships. That needs to be something that is looked at and examined after we get past this COVID crisis. But right now, our focus is on student athlete safety and making sure that we're able to preserve some aspect of the season if we're given authorization to do so by state officials.
Next question comes from Nicole at WBNG. I will answer it unless Nicole gives me a thumbs down that this isn't good enough. What is the latest on organized team practices? Still prohibited, unable to start until 9/21. Yes, that is correct. There can be no practices. Nothing can start on 9/21. Start date of the fall season. The practices will begin on 9/21.
Yes. The best way to put it is school-sponsored practices may not be held as per the guidance from state officials until September 21st.
All right, so that answers that one. Jason, for the BU group, what's the status on golf and gymnastics? Either were mentioned by Governor Cuomo, and he hasn't seen a lot about those.
Yeah, keep in mind the sports that Governor Cuomo announced on August 24th, those were 3 slides on a PowerPoint presentation. They were not all-encompassing of every sport that is labeled low or moderate risk, nor are they all-encompassing of high-risk sports. So the low-risk sports do include golf and gymnastics and tennis that were not necessarily mentioned during Governor Cuomo's announcement, but they are included in the guidance provided by the Department of Health for youth sports and recreation.
Okay, Greg Brownell from the Post-Star asking about the number of practices and the increase in the number of practices and how it changed. As you may have heard, Greg, it's 10 and 12 now, Robert, 10 for every sport in the fall with the exception of football. If you just want to give some thoughts on the practice requirement and why the numbers were adjusted today.
Yeah, the practice requirement is in there out of an abundance of caution for student athletes. Our association is aware that many students have been working out during the COVID crisis independently, away from school and away from their teammates. However, there is a reality and there is a possibility that some students have not had the gratuity nor the desire to participate and work out as other student athletes have. So we feel like adding a few additional practices to the beginning of the season for conditioning purposes when they're with their high school coach is a smart idea.
Robert, this is one that I don't know if we've really talked a lot about, but it's a really good question from Jason again. Fall unified sports, the unified sports that are held in fall season. Have we had any discussion about them?
We have not had a lot of discussion about that, but I do believe that if we're able to host a unified sport, depending upon what sport it is, we're going to do everything that we can to provide that opportunity for those student athletes.
Okay. Kevin Marr, Long Island, News 12, asks about the Nassau County superintendent's decision to postpone into the fall. And now, I don't want to speak for those superintendents, but obviously the message seems to be they're still thinking about whether that was the right decision or not. If you want to comment on what happened in Section 8 in Nassau.
Yeah, each section has their own autonomy and authority to decide on interscholastic athletics that is most appropriate for them. And that same situation and stance goes for every school district throughout the state. There is no requirement to host interscholastic athletics this fall. And every section has the autonomy and the authority to decide what is best for those student athletes that they work on behalf of.
Next question comes from Phil Blackwell, which talks about the superintendents again. The letter that the Superintendent's Council sent to Governor Cuomo, their desire to have the season moved until winter, what kind of impact that had on us and your.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a great relationship with the Superintendent's Coalition. I have a great relationship with superintendents throughout the state. I do think superintendents of schools, as well as school administrators, have many challenges and many obstacles as they prepare for the reopening of schools. No problem whatsoever with our school administrators expressing concern and seeking assistance. As a result of some of those concerns, we are putting together and developing a comprehensive guidance document that we plan to release on Friday as an avenue or a way to assist schools in the reopening of interscholastic sports.
Eugene asked the question back to football and volleyball. Is there still a chance it could be played in the fall between September 21 and November 29?
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, based upon the information we have right now, that decision was made by state officials. And if anything changes, that decision will be made by state officials to go ahead and modify or revise the guidance that was provided on August 27th to us.
He also asked about, is it possible that the fall season goes on with the lower risk sports, not including volleyball and football? Yes, that is a possibility. That is as we are progressing right now. And if that's the case, what would happen with football and volleyball? This is something we talked about. This would be a section issue, right?
It would be a sectional decision. I mean, if hypothetically, and I think the possibility is there, that soccer, field hockey, girls tennis, girls swimming, cross country have a season this fall, and as per the guidance that has been provided, volleyball and football teams practice and don't get the opportunity to participate in the game. That would probably conclude their season. But again, so much is dependent upon the decision of the officers and any additional guidance that we receive as a state association. But ultimately, if football and volleyball want to be moved to the spring season by individual sections, they have the ability to do that. And I do believe some sections are considering that move.
Okay. Robert, if you get the opportunity, I don't know if you have to let people into the meeting. Nicole from WBNG got booted out. So I don't know if you get a message from her that she'd like to be let back in, if you can do that.
Okay, just let her back in.
Yep, that would be great. While we talk, Tim Taylor asked, why is volleyball now a high-risk sport as opposed to a moderate-risk sport? Actually getting to play when they could play. This is something that you want to talk about, but it's one of those things that our decision about the high-risk or moderate risk.
Yeah, there was a lot of confusion about the differentiation between volleyball as to why was it originally discussed to be a lower moderate risk sport, and now why is it being considered a high-risk sport? Originally, when we came out with our information pertaining to COVID, we were utilizing the NFHS sport risk assessment. The NFHS, a national governing body for high school athletic associations based out of Indianapolis. They are our governing body for all high school sport out the country. Their assessment from their sports medicine advisory committee that I have an opportunity to be a member of determined volleyball to be a lower moderate risk sport based upon the potential of respiratory droplet spread. Now, when the guidance came out from the Department of Health here in New York State has their own criteria, and they also have no obligation to abide by the NFHS risk assessment. New York State determined volleyball and football and competitive cheer in the fall to be high-risk sport based upon the criteria that they developed.
Okay, thank you. Next is Phil Sanzo, who asks, how many positive cases are allowed on a team if that team has to shut down? Is that something we would determine, or is it up to this?
That would probably be something that the district and their own local Department of Health would consult on. That is nothing that we would provide guidance upon. That is certainly a local or even a state Department of Health question.
Very good. Kevin, News 12, do you see a scenario where certain districts in section would opt out of sports while others give it a try?
Decisions in each individual school district throughout the state. There's going to be certain challenges that face that may prevent them from providing the opportunity for student athletes to participate in interscholastic sports this fall, while other school districts may be able to provide that opportunity. And as Governor Cuomo announced last week, that decision rests with the school district.
Frank Wolf, Western New York Athletics, talks about potential scheduling issues. And I think this is something you kind of talked about. Maybe you want to expand on it. The regions of the state, the contiguous regions of the state, playing a team from your section versus out of your section, and could it affect your scheduling, and could it hurt trying to schedule your rival opponent if they're not, right next to it?
I think at the beginning of the season, up until October the 19th, we as a high school athletic association are going to limit games in those low and moderate risk sports to your own league or your section. Beyond October the 19th, assuming no guidance from state officials is changed or revised, then after October the 19th, schools would have the opportunity to participate in games against other opponents, not necessarily in their league or section, but even beyond their region.
All right. Nico in Syracuse asked the same question as Kevin, talking about low risk to moderate risk sports on 921. Is it feasible that some schools could be in and some could be out? I think we're good, right, Nico? We covered that. Okay, thank you, buddy. Darius at Channel 9, NFHS uses different categories for high, low, and moderate. Where's the difference between the NFHS and the state? I think we covered that. I don't think you're good. Okay. Adam, if a situation arises where volleyball and football are moved, how could they move it to later in the year? Would it be condensed? Would it be a spring sport? I think you covered it, up to the individual sections if they wanted to move out in the fall, if they don't feel confident to play later. Right?
And Chris, I do want to add that if they decide to do that, then it would be up to them and how they fit volleyball and football into a different time period. But I think some of the concerns that I've heard expressed is moving volleyball and football could negatively impact the spring seasons for those student athletes that just had their season completely canceled after 3 or 4 practices in early March. So there are an awful lot of concerns about attempting to move specific sports to later in the year.
Here's a good one from Darius again at Channel 9. What should we expect in Friday's guidelines when they're released? Well, I'll start to tell you, at this point, it's almost 50 pages to dissect, but I'll let Robert do it because he's done all the lifting on this one. It is quite the document about Friday.
Yeah, I mean, my goal for the guidance document that we're creating as an association, I'm relying very heavily upon our section executive directors, our COVID task force, and other administrators throughout the state to assist in the creation of this comprehensive document. But it's been my goal as the executive director to try to provide a document to our member schools that can help alleviate some of the stress associated with the challenges and obstacles and difficulties of returning interscholastic sports this fall. Obviously, there's many different variables and many different factors that a school district needs to be aware of to address the COVID crisis, all the way from what are some considerations for officials, what should a school district be aware of when traveling to an opposing school, what are some of the considerations they need to be aware of when hosting another school on their campus. So again, the document is hopefully going to be very comprehensive and will be user-friendly for our member schools.
Peter Schwartz, again, this is talking about NASA in Section 8. I know you covered it. I don't want to speak for you, so I'll let you say, but he says, how confident are you that Section 8 would reconsider their decision? Peter, to speak from our standpoint, that is Section 8's decision. Robert?
Yeah, absolutely correct, Watson. I mean, I think the decision that Section 8 has made rests with Section 8, and they have full authority and autonomy, and they have our support in making those decisions that they feel is in the best interest of the school districts that they work on behalf of.
This is a unique one that we've talked a little bit about internally, but it's interesting to get your take on. So obviously we're talking a Zoom call with the media around the state about the situation and what's going on. If we were talking to student athletes, and when we get the opportunity to meet with student athletes, how would you kind of explain everything, and what would your message to them right now be if we were talking to student athletes?
Yeah, I have the gratuity of having a 13-year-old daughter that's looking forward to running cross country and track in the upcoming school year. So I get the wonderful privilege of talking to a student athlete every day. But my message to student athletes is we have been given authorization to start interscholastic sports this fall. And it's up to those student athletes throughout the state to be leaders within their school, to be leaders within their community, and to follow all of the safety protocols for social distancing and wearing masks. If we are going to finish this season, it's going to be contingent upon them listening and abiding by all of the guidance that's being provided.
Frank Wolf asked a question about live streaming games, Spectrum and NFHS Network. Frank, if you're okay, I'll get with you personally and we'll talk about the situation. We're kind of working through a lot of that, and I can talk about that after that. Back to Phil. I may be able to answer this one, but Robert, jump in. If coaches have questions about the COVID guidelines through the season, direct them to their section directors. I would say yes, and their athletic director at your own individual school, right?
Yeah, on the comprehensive document that we have started putting together, I have my email address, I have my contact information, and one of the pieces of guidance that I provided is if anybody has questions, I encourage them to reach me or their section executive director. I'm very accessible. I try to be very accessible. My cell phone number is posted on our website, so I think people know how to get a hold of me. I don't always have every answer, but I can certainly work as hard as I can in order to get that answer for them.
Is there any discussion or guidance on the feasibility of sectional play? I know Many of you know when it comes to fall sports, the regionals and the state championships for the fall have been canceled, but that is not the case for winter and for spring. We want to make sure you're aware of that. But what could happen at the section level, Robert, to kind of culminate a season, if you will?
It's definitely completely up to the sections as to if they're going to be able to host any kind of a culminating event. That would be a section decision.
Let's see. AJ and Rochester, golf, do they need 10 practices before they play? And how they see the weather turns golf? I think we spoke about today. There isn't a minimum practice requirement for golf, right?
Yeah, golf and bowling do not have a minimum practice requirement. Their requirement is stipulated in our handbook is simply training.
Yeah, and I think the weather question is, you and I were on a call today. We're hoping for the warmest winter in history, right? With the exception of like skiing. So the outdoor sports can go as long as they can. Let's see. AJ's question. So, Bob. Okay, Bob Shaba has asked a question. Will fans be allowed into games in the fall? We talked a little bit about it, but you want to talk about potentially the fans?
The guidance provided to us right now from the Department of Health states that no more than 2 spectators per participant can be permitted in any games. And again, that guidance is coming from our New York State Department of Health.
Another one that we talked a little bit about internally and then within the membership, so it's kind of circulated a little bit, guidance when it comes to remote learning and then playing sports. If schools are going to use a hybrid, they're going to go in person, they're going to go remote. Can that student who's doing the hybrid be a class?
Yeah, right now, the information that we've received from the State Education Department in our communication with them recently, I released a memo pertaining to remote students as to whether they're going to be eligible to participate or not. The State Education Department has a regulation referred to as the Bona Fide Student Regulation. That states that as long as a student is taking 3 courses plus physical education, they are eligible for interscholastic athletics. So it doesn't matter what educational platform a student is currently taking, whether it be hybrid, remote, or all in person, that student, in accordance with the State Education Department's Bona Fide Student Regulation, would be eligible.
Back to Jesse McWilliam, who talks about, listen, weather is going to come into effect at some point in the late fall, but with us, delaying the start of the winter sports season, is the end date that has for fall sports to be concluded?
Since sports are starting on September 21st, the end date is taken care of by the individual section, but the fall season cannot take any more than 15 weeks.
15 weeks on the fall season for Jesse. Kevin as well wanted to know, and I think we talked about the risk difference between some sports. Can we, as the association, talk to state officials and try to reassess risk levels when it comes to various sports?
Yeah, I mean, we're in communication with state officials, but I think we have to be cognizant that the risk assessment for volleyball and football, since those are the 2 most widely discussed and have generated the most questions over the course of the past 5 or 6 days, that risk assessment has been exactly the same since the Department of Health released their youth recreation guidance in mid-June.
Greg Sarah talked about season starts in fall, we get started, and then there's some sort of shutdown, whether it's the school closes or the government, the state shuts things down. Would they be able to pick up their season in 2021? Is that what you do? Yeah,
we referenced that in our press release today. That's going to be at the discretion of the New York State Public High School Athletic Association's officers, who have to make decisions between regularly scheduled meetings of our governing board. And what I mean by that is, if the fall sports season starts and soccer and field hockey and cross country get 10 or 15 practices in, they have a couple competitions, and then unfortunately, because of a spike or because of guidance provided by state officials, the season must be suspended or postponed, then it would be at the discretion of those officers to determine if the season had concluded or not. Now, if we've played 7 weeks and soccer teams have played 12 games and field hockey teams have played 13 or 14 games, then I think we probably would be able to, at that point in time, determine that the season would have concluded, and then we'd have to start making decisions as to when the winter sports season could begin based upon, again, the guidance from state officials.
Okay, back to Greg, who has a follow-up question, so to speak. It's kind of a hypothetical. Let's say volleyball and football practice in the fall, but they never play a game. They never get into a game situation, and they practice during the fall. Could they still move into a spring sport?
They certainly could still move into a spring sport. That would be up to the discretion of each individual section and then also the officers of the association.
Following up to that, Lindsay Kramer asked about football and volleyball practices, letting them practice for kind of an undetermined amount of time without knowing if and when there's going to be a game or a season. What are your thoughts on that?
I think right now, I've talked to quite a few student athletes that are interested in just getting back out onto the field with their friends, with their coaches. I also had to talk to a lot of student athletes and their parents when the spring season was unfortunately canceled at the beginning of this COVID crisis. And at that point in time, a lot of student athletes were just interested in remaining on the practice field with their friends. I think right now, for the authorization to be provided for those high-risk sports to at least be given the gratuity and the opportunity to practice is the best we can do right now. And if anything changes, our state officials will go ahead and determine what modifications or revisions will be done for those high-risk sports.
Okay, very good. We're getting some double ups. I'm just going to kind of power through some of them. Lindsay asked about the practice. Jason D. News asked about football and volleyball, potentially in the spring. I think asked about playing teams or schools within their own leagues and sections. Section 3 is very big, so if Watertown plays Syracuse and Utica, yes, right, Robert, you're within your own section. Yep. So you're still within your own section, so that is allowed. And then October 19th, you can go outside the section, right, Robert?
Assuming the guidance doesn't change, that is correct.
Taylor asked about fans. We talked about the two per student athlete. Let's see. Keith Abdel, if half the teams in a section decide not to play in the fall and the other half do not, what happens, I guess, if that happens? If you have a 50-50 split on we're going to play or we're not?
Yeah, it's going to be a decision of the section as to whether they're going to move that season or not. Right now, as far as our state high school athletic association has determined, we are starting on September 21st with those low and moderate risk sports, and then also with those high risk sports being limited to practice only.
Okay. Sorry, second half of my question leapfrogged.
Okay, all right, we're good to go. We got it as well. Let's see. Greg Brownell, Syracuse, or the Post-Star asked if we talk about media access to events. Not yet. It is in the preliminary discussions, Greg, and we can certainly have a sidebar conversation. I think many of you would be interested in that, but we can talk about that as we kind of press on through everything here. Jenna asked parents and coaches, frustrated about the ability to play games if you're a football and volleyball player. I think we have a message for student athletes and for people involved as to what the course of action is going here. Frank Wolf, I lost your question for a hot second. Surrounding states are playing all sports, but in particular, thoughts on the fact that it's not permitted in New York.
Yeah, I think we have unique situations here in the state of New York, and we have leadership that is looking at from a situation of abundance of caution. And I think we have to respect that, and we have to realize that the guidance has been provided based upon their criteria. And right now, we have about 208,000 student athletes that participate in the fall season. The decision by Governor Cuomo last Monday is providing 130,000 student athletes with the chance to start their season with very little restrictions on September 21st. Unfortunately, volleyball and football are considered those high risk, and they're being limited to practice only. But I think we have to be cognizant that giving the opportunity for them to practice and participate is a step in the right direction.
AJ with a good follow-up. He was paying attention, so bonus points for him. 15 weeks is the length of the fall sports season. He just wanted to know, and I think the answer is yes, the practices and the season begin on September 21 for football and volleyball as well, so their clock is running with their 15 weeks then, right?
They would. That clock would start.
Okay. Frank Wolf asked about ice hockey, which is something down the road that we haven't a great deal with because we're worried about the fall. Thought anything about ice hockey and anything when it comes to player equipment or safety or anything like that at this point?
We have not. We have been working with our national governing body who is providing us with some considerations for individual sports. To be honest, I've only been focused on the fall sports right now. Once we get that guidance taken care of and out to our member schools, we'll start focusing on the winter sports seasons.
Okay. Timely one from Jesse McWilliam. I don't know if he's on the call or not. He requested to be on here. Jesse wanted to know, have you had a lot of communication with neighboring states about how they're moving forward and how things are going with their high-risk sports? The executive director of the Rhode Island Association was going to be on our call. I don't know if he was or not, but Robert, do you want to talk about if you spoke to your neighboring states?
Yeah, I'm having a great deal of discussions and communication with a lot of states throughout the country. Every Monday morning, I meet with every other executive director in the Northeast, and probably 6 to 7 times just in the last couple of months, I've met with every other executive director in the country via Zoom. I'm constantly text messaging or calling executive directors to discuss what they're doing, how they're doing it, and bouncing ideas off of one another. And I think the communication that we have as colleagues at the executive director level throughout the country has been very beneficial to the work that's being done.
Getting to the bottom of the chat, so if there are some questions, we've got a little bit of time left, so if you have a question that you want to put in the chat that we haven't covered yet, please go ahead. Nicole at WDNG asked about, talking to the governor's office about high-risk sports, hoping for decisions to be made about moving high-risk sports. Did we cover that, Nicole? Are we good, or do you need more from Dr. Zayas about moving?
I apologize if it was when my computer crashed, but I just want to know, is there a date in mind? My understanding is it's up to the sections, but say, September 15th comes and the practice date is 6 days away. Is there kind of an anticipated date where you see sections just making the call to move football and volleyball to the spring because it's just too late without knowing if they'll have the ability to play games?
I think so much is contingent upon what is the readily available information at that point in time, and attempting to predict what's going to happen beyond September 21st, I think becomes very challenging. But I do know that there's a tremendous amount of people working on these situations, working on these questions, and I have the utmost confidence that we're going to be able to provide beneficial participation opportunities for students in those school districts where it is determined to be feasible.
Next two questions kind of go together, so to speak. Bob Chavez and Frank Wolf asking about the spectators and 2 per athlete. I think I can answer Frank's question. He says that, I assume that means no student sections. Yes, no student sections, so it would be only 2 per student athlete. And then Bob's question was about 2 per athlete. Is there anything in place, if people don't want to come into the facility, but they want to stand around the outskirts of the fence and watch the soccer match or watch field hockey, Robert, that would be a school decision, right?
It would be, and I think that's going to be so dependent upon what is the facility makeup and design. So I think those are really going to be individual case-by-case basis.
I know something we have talked about in the office, and Eugene asks about it when it comes to football or other high-risk sports, really. Do you have a sense of when practices could kind of take the next level up? Low contact, full contact, full team workout, things like that. What are your feelings on that?
Yeah, I mean, we really don't need to speculate on what's the next step for the sports of football and volleyball until additional authorization is given for those sports to move in a different direction than what the guidance is currently providing, which is they're limited to practice right now. And if anything changes, those state officials will certainly make that determination.
Okay, this is one that I haven't really thought a lot about and may pick your brain a little bit, Robert. Jason wants to know, if a football or volleyball team practices in the fall and they play no games, then the school or the section decides that they're going to move to the spring, do those student athletes have to get 10 practices in again before they play a game in the spring?
Yeah, that's really a safety issue. And I would think that we would want to require those student athletes to practice again, especially if there's an extended period of a layoff between when they finish their last practice and then when they would be starting their next practice. We need to make sure that student athletes are participating in a safe manner. And that's really the rationale and the justification for the practice requirements.
Okay. The last one in the chat right now, so if you have anything else to put in there, please throw your question into the chat. Peter Schwartz wants to know, and I know many of you have seen the rallies that have gone on in Section 8 because they would like to play in the fall season, but aren't going to be able to do that as of right now. Many of the student athletes and people in Nassau want to be heard. What is your message to directing their message to the right people?
Yeah, I think voicing their concerns to their school administrators, and in Nassau County, Section 8 is no different than any of our other 11 sections. I think they're working in the best interest of the student athletes that they have a responsibility for. And I think we need to support any decisions that sections and school districts are making that are being made for those student athletes that they work on behalf of every single day.
Okay. Keith Lobdell asks about football, potentially if it goes to the spring of 2021 and then comes back in the fall of 2021. Are we worried about injury concerns? I would say that's a long way down the road right now, Keith, and I'm sure we would discuss it, but haven't yet. Robert, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, that's been a topic of discussion with the work that I'm doing for the National Federation Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. So that is being discussed, that topic. From a risk minimization standpoint. So I think those types of discussions need to be held if and when a section would make that determination.
Darius at Channel 9 asks again about the document, the information packet that we're going to put out on Friday. Really for all fall sports, things that are going to be in there, will there be things like contact requirements, PPEs, face masks, testing? Are all those things going to be included in Friday's release?
Yeah, we are trying to look at the guidance that's being provided by state officials and then providing that in a clear, concise manner for our member schools. So we are covering things such as face coverings or face masks, screening procedures and protocol that are being dictated to us by the Department of Health, covering aspects such as transportation, hydration. So we're trying to make the document as comprehensive as possible to benefit our member schools and ultimately the near 600,000 student athletes that will be participating in high school sports in the upcoming school year.
Jesse McWilliam again asks about practice officially starting on 9/21. Can coaches have access to their teams when school begins, like lifting and weight room and training? Robert, is it still considered the off season before September 21?
Yeah, the best way to put that is no school-sponsored activity should be hosted or operated by the school until September 21st.
Tim Taylor asks about meeting with the section executive directors. I think, Tim, the two groups we have spent the most time with within this office are section executive directors and the COVID task force. Those two groups seem to be meeting in the many conversations you've had with the 11 section executive directors. Have you gotten a sense on where they are and where things are going and kind of how things are going in the individual sections?
Yeah, I would think that, the 11 section executives are some of the most dedicated individuals that I've had the opportunity of working with. They're all focused on the same thing of doing what's in the best interest of the students that they work on behalf of. And they too are working with school superintendents and their member schools and Department of Health within their own individual sections. So they're doing just as we're doing at the state. They're waiting for readily available information to be presented, examining that guidance, and then making the best decision that they can at that point in time.
All right, this one we could go on for days and hours about, but I'll defer to you to keep it short and sweet. Nico in Syracuse asked, can you just talk about what the effort has been like between NYSPHSAA schools, sections, basically how intense have things been as of lately and moving forward to get high school sports back?
Yeah, I'm talking to administrators late into the night, very early in the morning. We're working 7 days a week right now as a collective group in order to provide as much guidance and as much resources as possible to our member schools. So I would characterize it as extremely intense. It's a great deal of responsibility when you start trying to put together plans that are going to benefit so many student athletes throughout the upcoming school year. So we take these responsibilities very seriously. And I know I speak on behalf of many school administrators throughout the state. This is the most challenging situation that we've ever been involved in. And it's something that we're taking very seriously. And we're taking it day by day. And it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen next week or next month. I know personally, I am not panicking about it. I'm trying to take things in a very calculated approach, in a very strategic approach, to make sure that we're making decisions in a manner that's going to benefit student athletes and our member schools.
A couple more in the chat, so if you want to get them in, go quick. Maybe we'll go till 8 o'clock or when we're done. Lindsay Kramer asked, and I think this is something that'll be in the document on Friday, but I don't want to take the words out of your mouth. When it comes to the state's guidance on social distance requirements, as far as physical education classes and then sports and interscholastic activities, the difference between them and how you go about getting maybe more guidance or clarity.
Yeah, right now the guidance for physical education courses coming from the Department of Education states that students must be 12 feet apart and wear a face mask. The guidance differs when you look at the sport and recreation guidance that talks about a 6 feet social distance and the wearing of face masks unless the student is not able to tolerate the face covering during physical activity. So we continue to examine the guidance. I've been asked the question many times, why are you not already releasing the guidance? There are some things that need to be analyzed, need to be examined, and there needs to be questions asked of state officials before we're able to fully release a document that we're confident is going to benefit our schools and not be detrimental to them.
This is a good one from Jason that we have talked about. I know came up, I believe, on both of our calls earlier today. It's about officials, and we have always been communicating that there's always an officials shortage. We can always use more officials. Do we have concerns about the officials who may not want to take part because of health? Or do we have, a feeling about officials, maybe being reluctant to work games?
Yeah, every year we have concerns about official shortages. I mean, the best of times, there are issues with a shortage of officials. So the COVID crisis has not helped in that situation. I would say it is a concern high on my priority list to ensure that we're going to have officials available to provide oversight over these interscholastic games that are quickly approaching. So that is a concern of mine, and I know the concern of the of other administrators throughout the state.
A couple more to go. Frank Wolf asked about inter-squad scrimmages. Frank, I see you on camera. Are you talking about between a team, an A team and a B team, or you're talking two separate teams being able to scrimmage?
Well, I doubt the two separate teams would be allowed to scrimmage. I'm talking like there's programs like Lancaster, Clarence, and Section 6 have very big programs. And at the beginning of each year, they have their big inter-squad scrimmages. So are they allowed to have those scrimmages?
Frank, are you referring to the sport of football?
I'm sorry, I'm referring to football, yes.
Okay. According to the guidance that we've been provided for those high-risk sports, they cannot have any contact. Contact is only incidental, and that must be focused on skill development. So until additional guidance is provided, those high-risk sports should not be scrimmaging or participating in any games or contests.
Frank also asked, are you working with the other associations in our state? Have you had a lot of conversations with the Catholic High School Athletic Association or the PSAL or the Independents?
Yeah, I am communicating with them on a weekly basis, trying to provide them. Anytime I receive guidance from state officials, I'm immediately forwarding that to them, as I do with our 11 section executive directors as well.
Griffin at WENY asked about, what do we think would have to happen for the state to allow high-risk sports to be reclassified, to low to moderate risk? I feel like we kind of covered that we're working with them and hoping to get more clarity as soon as we can. Right?
Yeah, I think that question needs to be directed to state officials, because we certainly, as a state high school athletic association, neither us nor our 11 sections have the ability to amend or revise that sport risk assessment. That was given to us by the Department of Health.
Okay, unless objecting, let's go with Lindsay Kramer as our last question. Do you envision a scenario where athletes will be allowed to be closer than 6 feet in practices and also in games?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think we can participate in an interscholastic soccer game or field hockey game without being within 6 feet. But the guidance is very clear that's been provided to us by the Department of Health as to how we can participate in those interscholastic contests for those low and moderate risk sports.
At this point, I have 2 screens of media members on my screen. If you have a question that needs to get in and you're on camera, raise your hand. If you did not get an answer, we'll just do one last round to make sure nobody's missing out. If you need something more, tell me now. Otherwise, I think we have hit the end of our road. So anyway, that's it. So Dr. Zayas, we want to thank you for carving out the time to do the call. All of you media members, we appreciate you being with us late on a Monday night. Please use this for your for your broadcasts and your print stories tonight. We will also post it on our YouTube page. If you need anything more, if anybody needs anything, always email me or call me. For those who need to find me, if you need my cell, it's 315-391-9835. If you ever need anything, give me a shout. And if we can do anything more for you, please let us know. But thanks for joining us tonight, guys.
Thank you very much.